Hey guys, Cody Morse here, covering the case study about the Missing Booster Club funds. So our problem identification analysis, what we know is we have a low socioeconomic type of neighborhood and school district here. We have a Mr. Stevens who's been with this for 4 years, roughly 450 students in the school. Our person of special interest, I guess you'd say, is Mrs. Bowman in this case. She has very active students. She has a daughter, Lucy, who has done extremely well in her cheerleading career, and is looking for funding to a national type of cheerleading event. Um, and we also know that Mrs. Bowman has approached Mr. Stevens about the PTA funding Lucy's trip, um, and Mr. Stevens has denied that request. And next thing we know, some funds have come up missing after a basketball game gate entry that Mrs. Bowman has worked. So some things I need to know is what do the policies look like? Regarding the tickets that were quoted in this case, the lost tickets. Um, are there any requirements for collecting funds? That's a big one to me. Does the PTA, even though they seem to help with this a lot, are there any requirements for them? What's the reasoning for not funding Lucy's trip by Mr. Stevens? Um, is there any evidence that Mrs. Bowman is to blame? That's something we're going to have to address. We got to find out. How does the school want to handle this? And what happened to the $50 bill that Mr. Bowman specifically seen another parent pay with? Some plan of action. If it's possible, we need to conduct a second count of the money versus the tickets sold if it's not already been done. We need to look at security cameras. We need to consult our district policies regarding these types of things. Have a conference with Mrs. Bowman. Let her plead her case again, especially if it's a day or two after. That gives us an idea. Has the story changed at all? And then question anybody else who may have been present. If we don't have any policies in place, let's get them in place so that this doesn't happen again. And while we're doing that, we're going to consult with district leadership. And in this particular case, if we need legal counsel, we'll seek that as well. We need to set some new guidelines, if they're not in place already, over who can collect funds in the future. And we also need to come up with policies regarding how the money's handled and counted versus tickets sold and how they're counted. This goes back to previous chapter there towards the start of this class that talked all about those raffle tickets. Well, this is kind of the same scenario in my opinion. So as a resolution, try to figure out where the discrepancies occurred. Did it happen from a single individual, or is this something that is premeditated, or is it just something that hey, accidents happen, we're humans? If it is a single person, can we approach them if it was accidental and say, hey, can you pay this back? This is what the difference is. Something along those lines. If they refuse to do that and, stuff like that, we think there's some suspicion of what may have really happened, well, maybe legal charges are the route to take. Let the police get involved. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. The way to keep this from happening again is to meet with PTA. Explain any policies and procedures and new ones that are coming out. Get them set on the fundamentals of how this is supposed to be handled. And as you can see in parentheses there, I said mistakes are often made due to a lack of knowledge. Lack of education gets a lot of people in trouble, and we can't play the ignorance card anymore. So it's our responsibility, it's my responsibility as an administrator to make sure that those people understand what has to happen. So that's something I would definitely do in the future. I think it leads to a more harmonious outcome with things like that. This is something that I draw some experience from. I've been involved with similar situations where it took some education to make sure it didn't happen again. We're not lawyers and we're not judges, and we don't always know the laws and how money should be handled in schools and this, that, and the other. So this is one way to help, reduce those numbers of instances that it's happening. So thinking, feeling, and valuing on this deal, I had a lot of confusion. A lot of it stems from why did this happen? Why hasn't there been a better policy in place? Which is pretty much answered by the first part of that question. Is if it had happened, it probably would have been addressed by now. should I be suspect of Miss Bowman, or is this a simple misunderstanding? Um, can Mrs. Bowman or any of the other parents technically be trusted with these types of events? Something else that I thought about while I was doing this is, are there any laws around who can do these things? We have policies and procedures, but are there any state and federal laws that guide us in this area? Um, Another question in my head, as feelings, is why does the principal have so much say in a PTA? Granted, I've never been a part of a PTA and I've never seen one operate, but should a principal have that much control over a parent-teacher association? I would think that a principal would be there to guide and direct and advise, but not to dictate, not to tell them how to operate, but to very much play the same role that a superintendent plays on a school board. Uh, and moving on, are there any policies in place that allow for the PTA to spend funds as they see fit? That goes right back with the last bullet there. Um, why hasn't the school addressed Mr. Stevens' workload so far? I mean, it's been made clear that he doesn't have an assistant to help him with these things. Is this something that has been approached and the school refused to do, or is this something that's just never been brought to a head? It's never been an issue, and this is something that now needs to be addressed. Um, and does the school have an athletic director, activities director, and AD that can help Stevens on this deal? I know right here in my high school, our athletic director does a lot with this. He puts forth quite a bit of effort. Now he's kind of, I guess, double tasking because he does have to watch the ball games and stuff like that as well. But he helps run it and he does a fine job of that. Maybe that's something that can be implemented here. Reflection. What has been highlighted here is, in my opinion, is an obvious need for more training and more guidance, and maybe more policies. I'm not a big fan of having a lot of policies in place because that's why people can't remember how to do things or don't do things right because there's just so many of them. But for something as serious as handling of money, that is something that we cannot afford to, wager on it and miss out on. This has to happen. So I think that's especially, in a community that has down economic times, and in this nation, has been in a down economics in the near, past. So we ought to strive for greatness, and if policies are what get that done, then that's how we do it. Um, I also need to make sure that I don't place the one blame on anybody, one individual, without any proof of what's going on. I like to think I'm a pretty open-minded and a understanding person. I try not to place blame until there is a reason to place blame, i.e., evidence that suggests that. But essentially, involvement is key to success. Being involved is what will lead to success as long as that involvement is of the positive type. So, are promoting effective and efficient management, and how do I, as a school leader, promote that? I think one way is by helping to create policies that address issues such as the one portrayed here that we've ran into with this situation. Those policies address that the school is not out money at that point in time. The school doesn't have to chase down anybody to try to get money back. We don't have to look at legal cases that cost money, stuff like that. And also being present at these sporting events and activities, it kind of promotes the efficient management of duties outside of my office. It shows that I'm involved, and that I can handle the workload. Although, as stated earlier, it'd be nice to have an assistant in this exact case. But that is something that I think that I could take forward to a governing body and say, hey, in order to be more effective and more efficient, we've got to have this. So that there shows some more management. And being involved with the PTA to help them with that education and training over the proper procedures. That's a big one. Keeping everything square with them and letting them know that I care about their well-being as an organization, and that I want to see them succeed. But we can't just always do exactly what we want. There are guidelines of what we have to follow. Promotion of the social learning by all students, and how do I, as a school leader, promote that? Maintaining an attitude of support of the groups, such as the PTA, without accusations when problems arise. A lot of students are going to be helped out by PTAs in their school careers. As long as a principal, I'm supporting that, that's a good thing. If you're not supporting it, I think that's probably made pretty evident in your community. parents, those outside of school, they're going to talk. People are going to know whether you're being easy to work with and whether or not you're promoting that, and when it all comes down to it, the PTA goes back to supporting students. And, as that medium, I need to be able to work with that medium to make it happen. As well as supporting the students in their extracurricular events in this case. You know, Sporting events are a very social event in the world we live in. So by being present there, that really helps to push that agenda. And the creation of policies that affect not only the PTA but students who are served by the PTA. As long as that PTA is within their legal limits and within their procedural limits within the district, then they're supporting students. And if they're not really truly a PTA, and that's my job to also make sure that we're doing things the right way. So these policies help maintain that and make sure that happens the proper way. And promotion of student academic learning. As a school leader, how do we promote that? How do I promote it? I make sure that funds are used appropriately from support groups. Let's make sure that it's across a good number of students rather than a single student. I think in this case study, that was a perfect example that was brought up about things you have to be cautious of. Let's make sure, that, in this case, if I'm meeting with the PTA and I bring that to light that, hey, this needs to make sure it's multiple kids, then maybe it's all right. And, in this case, maybe they should take the entire group of these cheerleaders to watch Lucy while she performs, and stuff like that. And that would be a more appropriate use of that funds at that point in time. Having policies in place that directly affect each student in a positive manner. PTA contributes to learning as well. I have to contribute to learning. Let's make that a harmonious relationship there. It directly affects them, so keep it lined out. And being present in extracurricular activities to help students understand that the world we live in right now, you literally have to pay to play. And when I say you have to pay, that means you have to get the grades. You have to be an academic learner and an academic achiever in order to be an athletic achiever. And I think that's probably pushed at most schools. If it's not, it needs to be. So that is another way of promoting the academic learning. And that's going to wrap up my synopsis of this case study. So thank you for watching.